Have you ever wondered how to master your deepest fears? Imagine standing on the edge of something terrifying, speaking in public, facing a looming deadline, or confronting a personal failure, and feeling a calm certainty instead of panic. That sense of unshakable confidence isn't just a lucky trait reserved for heroes in movies. It's something you can cultivate. Ancient Athens knew this, and nobody explained it better than Plato. In his vision, courage isn't mindless dauntlessness. It's a skillful harmony between knowing what to fear and what not to fear. Today we'll explore how that ancient insight can reshape the way you approach every challenge, every day. Have you ever found yourself questioning what real bravery looks like? Plato began by placing courage among four pillars that hold up a flourishing soul: wisdom, temperance, justice, and courage. He argued that none of these virtues stands alone. Each depends on the others. Without wisdom, courage becomes recklessness. Without temperance, it becomes bravado. And without justice, it slips into oppression. In the Republic, he writes that courage is the preservation of the correct belief about what is to be feared by the whole city. In other words, bravery emerges when you align your fears with truth, not hype. At the heart of this definition lies a radical idea. Courage is communal. It isn't simply a private feeling of adrenaline. For Plato, the healthiest souls mirror the healthiest states. Citizens must share a clear understanding of real dangers, whether that's an invading army or destructive impulses within. Guardians, the elite defenders of the polis, trained rigorously not to charge blindly into battle, but to recognize which fears shielded the community and which only clouded judgment. Their courage was measured not by how boldly they ran forward, but by how wisely they stood their ground. This leads to a second revelation: fear isn't the enemy, ignorance is. Plato taught that many fears are phantom projections fueled by rumor or emotion. Real fear protects us from injustice, violence, and moral failure. False fear drags us into regret, anxiety, and paralysis. Mastering fear then means learning to distinguish between the threats worth respecting and the ones worth dismissing. It's not about erasing every quiver in your heart, but about sharpening your mind so it trusts only the alarms that matter. Notice how this contrasts with modern cliches that equate bravery with ignoring every danger. Plato's guardians weren't reckless thrill seekers. They studied strategy, philosophy, and ethics. Their training emphasized reflection as much as action. They learned that courage grows from knowledge. You cannot stand firm against a storm if you mistake a breeze for a hurricane. This balance between thought and action is the very essence of philosophical courage. On a personal level, this means your own courage depends on your inner dialogue. When a challenge arises, pause. Ask yourself, what exactly am I afraid of? Is this fear protecting me or paralyzing me? That simple question echoes Plato's method, turning raw emotion into reasoned choice. In practice, it can look like taking a breath before responding to criticism, or listing out worst-case scenarios to see how many you can actually handle. Each time you do, you train your mind to separate genuine risk from imagined threats. Plato also reminds us that courage has a moral dimension. It protects what we value most. Courage without purpose becomes cruelty or self-destruction. True bravery is the defense of what you hold dear: your values, your community, your integrity. When you stand up to peer pressure, say no to unethical shortcuts, or persist in your goals despite doubt, you're practicing that same civic virtue on a personal scale. As we move forward, remember, courage is not a fixed trait. It's a skill you build by learning what not to fear and by acting on what you do believe. In the next section, we'll dive into Laches, where Socrates digs even deeper, challenging us to weigh fear against wisdom itself. But that is not all. Have you ever found yourself frozen in a moment where your heart screamed to run but your mind told you to stay? In Laches, Plato stages a conversation between two generals and Socrates, probing the very nature of courage. At first glance, bravery seems straightforward, charging into danger without hesitation. Yet Socrates dismantles this notion, revealing that blind boldness is no virtue at all. He asks, Is courage merely a kind of endurance of the soul? If so, then even a stubborn fool who refuses to budge from harm out of ignorance would count as courageous. But Plato refuses this. True courage, he insists, requires reasoned judgment, the ability to discern which fears protect and which fears imprison. Imagine you're in a high-stakes meeting and a colleague lashes out unexpectedly. Your adrenaline surges, urging you to strike back or flee, but then you pause. You recognize that this emotional outburst isn't directed at you personally, but at the stresses of their day. You choose calm, respond with a question, and diffuse the tension. That split-second decision embodies what Socrates calls fear regulated by wisdom. It's not absence of fear. It's fear mastered, guided by intellect. This is the heartbeat of Platonic courage. Plato uses the general's own experiences to illustrate the trap of equating courage with brute force. One general recalls standing, firm under fire, yet later admits that panic gripped him. He acted out of impulse, not deliberate choice. Socrates highlights this paradox. Actions can resemble bravery, even when the soul is steeped in confusion. Real courage, therefore, is not measured by outward deeds alone, but by the inner clarity that informs them. In this dialogue, fear becomes a teacher rather than an enemy. Its presence signals that something valuable is at stake, demanding careful thought. On a deeper level, Plato suggests that wisdom and courage are inseparable. Courage without wisdom is like a ship without a rudder, able to cut through waves but blind to hidden rocks. Wisdom without courage is no less flawed. One might perceive truth but lack the nerve to stand by it. The harmony of these virtues produces a soul that knows when to stand firm and when to yield, when to draw the sword of action, and when to sheath it in prudence. Consider your own life. Perhaps you've hesitated to share a bold idea, fearing criticism, yet rushed into a risky venture without planning. Both scenarios reveal the same deficiency, failing to align your fear with sound judgment. The remedy lies in slowing down that reflex. Next time you feel tension tighten your chest, ask yourself, what am I truly afraid of? Is this real danger or a shadow cast by imagination? This Platonic exercise transforms fear into a mirror, reflecting whether your impulses serve your deepest values or sabotage them. Ultimately, the lesson of Laches reshapes courage from a static trait into a living practice. It invites you to make fear your ally, listen to its warnings, but let wisdom decide which alarms to heed. In doing so, you cultivate an inner compass that holds you steady in life's storms, and suddenly, everything changes. You know someone like this, a leader who stands calm amid chaos, whose presence alone steadies a room. In the Republic, Plato portrays such figures as the guardians of the polis, philosopher kings and their auxiliaries, who embody a collective, disciplined form of courage. These guardians aren't reckless warriors thirsting for glory. They are scholars of the soul, trained to perceive true threats to justice and harmony. Their valor springs from a unified vision, each citizen sharing the right beliefs about fear and safety, so that the community's resolve never wavers. Imagine a city under siege, not only by foreign armies but by internal strife, greed, envy, and rash passions tearing at its foundations. Plato argues that such moral decay is far more dangerous than any external foe. The Guardian's first task is therefore educational, to cultivate in every citizen a sense of measured fear, respect for injustice and cruelty, and to banish phobias that fragment society. Distrust between neighbors, paranoia bred by rumor, or the panic of unrestrained desire. By aligning the populace's fears with rational principles, the city forges a relentless unity. At the individual level, each guardian undergoes rigorous mental and physical training. They learn mathematics and dialectic to sharpen their reasoning, music and poetry to refine their emotions, and gymnastics to reinforce bodily courage. This holistic regimen ensures that their courage is grounded in understanding, tempered by self-control, and animated by justice. They do not charge blindly into battle. They stand their ground only when the cause is worth the risk, and they avoid needless violence that would corrupt their own virtue. This Platonic vision of civic courage holds a powerful lesson for personal leadership. True leaders, whether in business, community, or family, must first master their own fears before guiding others. They recognize that panic can spread faster than wildfire. A single reckless decision at the helm can doom an entire venture. By contrast, leaders who govern with thoughtful courage inspire trust, resilience, and collective resolve. Their calm analysis of threats reassures the team that danger is neither overstated nor dismissed, but met with appropriate strategy. In practical terms, you can adopt the Guardian's model by creating philosophical alliances in your life. Surround yourself with people who challenge your anxieties constructively, friends who question your worst-case scenarios and celebrate your well-calculated risks. Engage in regular fear audits, listing the obstacles you dread and examining which fears are valid barriers and which are imagined chains. This discipline mirrors the Guardian's educational ethos, transforming raw emotion into communal strength. Plato also warns against the flip side. When leaders exploit fear for power, they become tyrants, cultivating irrational dread of enemies. Within or outside, fractures society and severs the bond of trust. On a personal level, when you let baseless anxieties dictate your choices, fear of missing out, fear of rejection, fear of failure, you hand control to unseen manipulators. The antidote, again, is philosophical self-rule, knowing which fears to honor and which to banish, standing firm for values that knit your inner community together. By blending wisdom with courage, the guardians of Plato's ideal city teach us that true bravery is civic and moral. It is not a solo feat, but a shared conviction that the right fears and hopes unite us in purpose. When you internalize this model, training your mind, body, and spirit to align in fearless harmony, you become your own guardian. And now imagine if you applied this insight to your own life. Have you ever noticed that when you let fear dictate your choices, you shut doors you didn't even know existed? In our fast-paced world, fear often masquerades as caution, the whisper that tells you, not now, be safe, stay comfortable. But Plato's insight reverses this script. Genuine courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the wisdom to ignore the false alarms. When you learn to spot these alarms, you reclaim vast reserves of energy and unlock opportunities that anxiously eluded you before. Consider daily anxieties, the jitters before speaking up in a meeting, the hesitation to launch your side project, the dread of rejection when you share your true self. Each of these is a doorway. Fear guards some, like the instinct that warns you against a dangerous shortcut. But it also grooms others, the phobia of judgment, the terror of change, the panic of stepping into the unknown. Plato would urge you to question every shiver in your spine. Is this fear protecting something vital, or is it merely a phantom? To apply this today, start with a fear audit. List your top 5 fears, big or small, and ask 2 questions for each. What is the real danger here? And what am I losing by avoiding this? You'll find that many fears collapse under scrutiny. The fear of public failure often hides the deeper fear of being seen as imperfect. The fear of commitment cloaks the dread of responsibility. By naming the true threat, you separate what deserves respect from what deserves a shrug. Next, practice strategic exposure. Choose one fear you've audited and deliberately lean into it, safely. If you dread public speaking, volunteer for a short toast at a friend's gathering. If you fear critique, post a piece of your work online and invite feedback. Each small act of calibrated bravery rewires your brain. You teach yourself that most fears are negotiable, not insurmountable. The result? A deeper sense of confidence, not born from ignoring peril, but from mastering it. This modern lens also applies to anxiety triggered by digital life. Notifications ping like tiny alarms, summoning you to react instantly. Plato would challenge you. Which interruptions merit your attention? By turning off non-essential alerts, you protect your focus and guard your energy. You decide which signals matter, just as the guardians of old chose which fears would bind their city and which would break its spirit. Shocking as it may sound, Embracing this Platonic filter can transform your career trajectory. Imagine applying for that stretch role you think you're not qualified for. Ask yourself, is this fear a barometer of inevitable failure, or is it a signal that growth awaits? When you pursue the job, project, or conversation behind that fear, you mirror the philosophical courage of Athens, calculated, informed, and fueled by purpose. Yet beware the mirror flip. Sometimes courage demands trusting fear. If a proposal consistently triggers unease in your gut, that pang might protect you from a misaligned partnership or an unethical choice. Plato reminds us that fear and courage are partners in a dance. Wisdom choreographs their steps. By listening and then weighing your instincts, you avoid both paralysis and recklessness. On a personal level, this approach rewires not only your actions, but your identity. You stop labeling yourself shy, anxious, or overcautious, and start seeing yourself as an ongoing work of art, a person evolving through deliberate choices. You claim ownership of your fears rather than allowing them to claim you. You become the curator of what matters, the gatekeeper of your inner world, and that is not all. Have you ever wondered how some people turn controversy into credibility? Plato's famous paraphrase, "Courage is knowing what not to fear," has sparked endless debate. Critics argue it oversimplifies his rich, nuanced philosophy, reducing that to a pithy soundbite. Others claim the phrase never appears in his dialogues. In fact, it's a modern distillation gleaned from the Republic and Laches, a catchy slogan rather than a direct quote. But this misconception reveals a deeper truth. Controversy around an idea can amplify its power when handled with intellectual integrity. First, let's clear the air. Plato never wrote those exact words. Scholars trace the line to motivational websites and social media graphics, not ancient manuscripts, yet the sentiment aligns perfectly with his teachings on calibrated fear and virtuous action. This mismatch between historical accuracy and modern usage unsettles purists, but it also drives curiosity. People search for the original context, diving into Plato's texts and discovering the depth behind the slogan. In this way, the controversy becomes a catalyst for learning. Another misunderstanding arises from confusing courage with stoicism. Some interpret Plato as advocating clinical detachment, a call to suppress all emotions. But that's a misread. Plato celebrates emotional intelligence. He urges us to feel fear, to respect it, and then to let reason guide our response. When you ignore fear without understanding it, you risk burnout, indifference, or moral blindness. True courage, he stresses, is warm with purpose, not cold with repression. A more heated debate centers on whether Plato's civic model of courage can apply to individual growth. Critics of modern self-help warn that extracting personal lessons from the Republic overshadows its political context, a blueprint for an ideal state ruled by philosopher kings. They caution against cherry-picking. You might embrace fear mastery, while ignoring the broader vision of justice that Plato insists must accompany it. Yet these critiques challenge you to hold complexity, to cultivate personal courage in service of something greater than yourself, community, ethics, or collective well-being. Then there's the tension between ancient and contemporary fears. Plato's guardians feared injustice, sedition, and moral decay. Today's guardians, therapists, coaches, social activists, warn against anxiety, imposter syndrome, and digital addiction. The core difference lies not in the fears themselves, but in how we respond. Both eras demand the same disciplined curiosity. Identify the real threat, question its origin, and act from informed conviction. This continuity underscores Plato's timeless relevance even as the battlefronts shift. A final controversy emerges in the realm of leadership. Some business gurus tout no-fear management, urging executives to bulldoze obstacles with brute force. They misappropriate Plato's idea, turning knowing what not to fear into permission to ignore dissent or ethical concerns. But Plato's model rejects both cowardice and tyranny. When fear of shareholder revolt silences moral outrage, or fear of failure drives corner-cutting, you undermine true courage. Leaders must balance stakeholder pressures with inner integrity, standing firm on principle, even when it costs them. Each of these debates circles back to a single challenge. Do you let noise about authenticity, historical accuracy, or misapplication drown out the core lesson? Controversy can paralyze or inspire. In Plato's hands, it becomes a workshop for refining ideas, not a tombstone that buries them. By engaging with dissent thoughtfully, you strengthen your convictions rather than letting them ossify into dogma. Now imagine if you knew the real story behind the words. Have you ever found yourself stuck in the same fear day after day? You know the routine. Worry about possible failure. Rehearse every worst-case scenario, then talk yourself out of taking any step forward. Plato's wisdom offers a powerful antidote, a step-by-step practice that turns fear into a guide, not a jailer. Daily fear journaling. Each morning, write down one fear that nags at you. It might be as small as saying no to a friend, or as large as applying for my dream job. Next to it, list 2 questions. What's the worst that could actually happen? And what's the best I might gain? This exercise forces you to examine the true stakes, mirroring Plato's call to align fear with reality. Over time, you'll see patterns. Certain fears dissolve under scrutiny, while others signal meaningful boundaries. Habitual micro-challenges. Courage isn't built in grand gestures alone, it's forged in thousands of tiny actions. Pick one micro-challenge per week. Speak up in a meeting, share an unpopular opinion, ask for feedback. Each act primes your brain to tolerate discomfort. Plato's guardians trained relentlessly, not for a single battle but for a lifetime of disciplined service. Your micro-challenges create that same muscle memory of bravery, one small victory at a time. Philosophical mentorship. Seek out people who model reasoned courage. They might be coaches, peers, or authors whose stories resonate. Engage in conversations about real-life fears, how they spotted them, weighed them, and chose when to act or refrain. This mentorship echoes Plato's dialectic method, learning not by rote but through questioning, debate, and shared insight. Fear-filtering rituals. Before making any major decision, career move, relationship choice, creative project, run it through a Platonic filter. Ask, which fears are signal and which are noise? Write both categories down, then prioritize the signals. This ritual slows impulsivity and deepens discernment. It transforms panic into data, empowering you to make choices aligned with your values, not your anxieties. Embodied courage practices. Plato emphasized harmony between mind and body. Incorporate physical disciplines that demand focus under stress. Martial arts, cold water immersion, or even structured breathing exercises. When you endure physical discomfort through mindful practice, you strengthen the neural pathways that regulate emotional fear. Your body learns that tension doesn't always demand flight. Sometimes it signals a moment to stand tall. Community accountability. Courage thrives in connection. Share your fear goals with a trusted circle and commit to progress updates. Plato's city flourishes when each guardian holds the others accountable to truth and justice. Likewise, your tribe can cheer your risks, challenge your excuses, and celebrate your breakthroughs. This network reframes fear as a shared adventure, not a solitary burden. Reflective debriefs. After each challenge, conduct a brief post-mortem. What fears arose? How accurate were they? What did you learn about your limits and your capacities? This debrief cements lessons into your character, turning volatile experiences into stable wisdom. Exactly the blend of emotion and reason Plato championed. When you weave these practices into your life, fear stops being a fog that obscures the path and becomes a compass that points you toward growth. You build a skill set as precise as a guardian's training regimen, calibrated to your own goals and values. You learn not only to act bravely, but to define bravery on your own terms, knowing intimately what to fear and what to cast aside. But you're just getting started. Have you ever found yourself drawn to the very thing you fear most? It sounds counterintuitive, but Plato hints that sometimes the deepest growth lies on the other side of our terror. True courage isn't just about standing firm, it's about leaning into the lessons fear offers, discovering strengths you never knew you had. First, consider the paradox of voluntary exposure. When you deliberately face a fear, speak in public, dive into cold water, ask for honest feedback. You learn that fear itself can become a trusted ally. Each time you step into anxiety, you map your limits and expand them. You prove to yourself that the signal fear sends isn't always danger, but sometimes opportunity. By embracing small doses of what scares you, you rewire your response to bigger challenges. Second, notice how fear sharpens focus. In moments of high stakes, your senses heighten. Plato would say that this intensified awareness can clear the fog of doubt and force you into decisive action. When you treat fear as data, information about what matters most, you harness its energy instead of resisting it. You shift from asking, "Why am I afraid?" to "What can this fear teach me right now?" That single question transforms fear from an obstacle into fuel. Third paradox strikes when courage relies on vulnerability. Plato's guardians trained to show no weakness, yet they also knew that admitting uncertainty could build trust. In leadership, revealing a moment of doubt can inspire empathy and loyalty. When you confess, "I'm not certain how this will turn out," you invite collaboration. You demonstrate that real bravery includes the humility to learn from others. This blend of strength and openness creates a resilience no amount of stoic resolve can match. Fourth, some fears protect you but overprotect you. Imagine a shield so large it blocks both harm and possibility. Plato warns against letting caution calcify into prison bars. When you cling to safety, you risk stunting your own growth. The real danger often isn't the risk itself, but the mindset. That avoids every risk. Breaking free requires identifying which shield to lower and when to keep it raised. That discernment is the crux of knowing what not to fear. Fifth, fear can reveal hidden values. When a situation terrifies you, ask, "What principle does this threat disturb?" If you dread speaking up about injustice, you uncover a core belief in fairness. If you fear creative failure, you reveal a deep need for self-expression. By tracing fear backward, you map your true priorities. Plato's method calls for turning fear into a mirror, reflecting the virtues you hold dear: wisdom, temperance, justice, and of course, courage. Sixth, paradox reappears when we learn that sometimes stepping away is braver than charging ahead. Plato's guardians knew when to hold the line and when to retreat to strategize. In life, walking away from toxic situations takes courage equal to facing down danger. Saying no to a bad deal, ending a draining relationship, or pausing a harmful habit are acts of fear mastery. They honor the protective purpose of fear rather than letting it trap you in destructive cycles. Seventh, the most surprising lesson is that fear itself can be transformed into compassion. When you confront your own anxieties openly, you gain empathy for others' struggles. You recognize the universality of fear and connect through shared vulnerability. Plato believed that the philosopher's soul nurtures empathy alongside courage. By acknowledging your own tremors, you open space for understanding and support. Eighth, paradoxical courage sometimes demands trusting the unknown. Plato's ideal city thrived on shared beliefs about dangers, but he also valued the capacity to navigate uncharted moral territory. When faced with a novel challenge, emerging technology, shifting norms, personal crisis, there's no preset map. You must trust your cultivated judgment to chart a new path. That requires bracing for unforeseeable fears and trusting in your inner compass. Each of these surprising twists reveals that courage is anything but simple. It dances with fear, vulnerability, restraint, and connection. It asks you not only to stand your ground, but to lean in, question, retreat, and rebuild. It transforms fear from enemy to instructor, and now you face your final test. Will you let fear define your limits, or will you use it to discover horizons beyond imagination? By now you've seen how Plato's wisdom reframes fear as a tool, one that, when wielded wisely, sharpens your focus, reveals your values, and forges deeper connections. Courage is rooted in knowledge, tempered by ethics, and energized by community. Become far more than mere bravery. They become transformative forces in your life. Remember the four virtues. Let wisdom guide your fears, temper your impulses, uphold justice for yourself and others, and stand firm with informed courage. Practice fear audits, micro-challenges, and reflective debriefs. Embrace the paradox that sometimes the bravest step is the one toward uncertainty, or the one that says enough and turns away from harm. Now imagine stepping into every moment with the clarity to choose which alarms you heed and which you silence. Picture yourself facing life's storms with a steady mind and an open heart. That is the path Plato laid out over 2 millennia ago, and it remains as potent today as ever. What will you choose not to fear?